Hi, welcome back to my channel. My name is Kylie. In this video, I'll be talking about the books I read this summer. Now, I wasn't too sure how to split it up because summer didn't technically start until June 21st, and it doesn't end until the 23rd of September. So I'm filming this a little bit early if we go by the season. I'll be talking about the books that I read from the beginning of June up until now. I've only read a couple of books in September, so nothing crazy, but let's get started talking about the 17 books I read this summer. Let's get into the first book that I read in June. That book is Every Summer After, and I really enjoyed this book. I gave it 4 stars, but the big thing for me was that I read this right after I finished Love and Other Words. And I know that's the big thing people say not to do, as they are really similar books. So if you read them back to back, you're just going to be comparing them more. And I did do that. The thing is, I love this book. I love this story. But the whole time I was thinking, did she copy Love and Other Words? So I didn't enjoy that aspect of it. The one aspect of Every Summer After that felt so unique to me was the aspect of swimming, because in this story, we have a main character, Percy. She spent her summers growing up at a lakeshore house, and then she goes back when she's older, and she learns how to swim, and she swims across the lake, and we just have this aspect of learning how to swim again, and athleticism. Like, I was so inspired to work out when reading this book. It was wild. I just wish that I could swim across a lake, but I don't have access to a lake near me, so I felt like running. But that was a unique thing. Every Summer After was a really good book. However, I recommend not reading it right after Love and Other Words like I did. Love and Other Words was such a good book. Completely in love with that book. But then Every Summer After came and it just wasn't quite as good, but it was still really, really good. The next book I read in June was The Midnight Library. This one had been on my physical TBR since the fall of last year, and I wasn't super excited to pick this up. When I first bought it, I was really interested in the plot because it's a literary fiction with an aspect of fantasy, because we have this midnight library that only exists in between life and death. So the main character, Nora, she tries to take her life and then she ends up in the Midnight Library. Nora has a chance at the Midnight Library to relive her life in many different ways because little changes along the way change her life drastically. So she has so many different versions of her life that she lives, and then she learns all these lessons through them. It was an enjoyable reading experience, however, it did feel really, really slow, and it might just be because I don't love literary fiction, but I think the premise of the book would be hard to not feel slow because we have mostly one character and you're following her through all of these different stories, but nothing is really happening consistently. So you're not really connected to any certain person for a while, and it was just okay for me. So I rated this book 3 stars. If you like how the plot sounds, then I recommend you pick it up. But for me, it's just not a favorite. The next book I read was The Summer I Turned Pretty. I really wanted to read this series this summer because I watched the Amazon Prime series last summer, and I, for one, don't like watching movies or TV shows before I read the book because the book is pretty much always better. But I was not a reader last summer and everyone was talking about the show, so I wanted to check it out. Personally, I didn't love the show. It just felt a little bit young for me, but it also felt mature, and I was interested to see how the books played out in comparison to the show, to see how different they are, because I know after reading books and then watching the movie how different they can be sometimes. So I decided to give the books a try because it seems like everyone is obsessed with this series. The first book in this series I gave 3.5 stars, which is not bad, but I just didn't really love it as a 22-year-old. Definitely felt a little bit young, and I never found myself rooting for Belly, especially in the first and second books. Side note, I cannot stand the nickname Belly, so reading it over and over was not super fun. I know that some people have no opinion about that, they don't care, but it just feels so childish to me. And I know that she is younger in this series and she does grow out of the nickname, which I really appreciated, but I just don't love it, especially when I see shirts with Belly on them. It's just weird. Like, I don't want a shirt that says Belly on it. Like, I get it, that's her nickname. It's cute as a kid, but I don't know. It wasn't my favorite. So that kind of bugged me about the first two books. But of course, it's not a super big deal, and we need to focus on the plot. But that's just a little side note. The second book in the series, It's Not Summer Without You, I gave 3 stars. I almost DNF'd this book. I was just not really loving it. The first book I actually finished in one day, which doesn't happen a ton for me, but it was super easy to fly through. But the second book I finished in 3 days, and I definitely considered giving up the series because I wasn't really enjoying it. I didn't want to waste my time. But I was reading it quickly, so I just decided to finish it and see what all the hype is about and see if it ended stronger than it started. The big thing I didn't love in It's Not Summer Without You was how whiny and complainy Belly was. It just seemed like she made such a big deal about the smallest things, and I mean, I get if you're younger, this seems more normal, I guess, and you can overlook it and you understand why she's feeling this way, but being older, I'm like, why? Why are you like this? You're annoying me. I'm not rooting for you. Stop doing that. So that was my big thing about the second book. The last book, We'll Always Have Summer, things started looking up. I actually rated this 4 stars, so in my opinion, the best book of the series. And in this book, the characters are in college, so they're grown up now. In this book, Belly grows out of her nickname. She wants to seem older, and she goes by Isabel, which I loved. I also just loved the character development because Belly didn't seem nearly as whiny anymore. In this book, things happened that I didn't love, and I know some people really disliked. And it seems like everyone's either Team Conrad or Team Jeremiah, but honestly, I have always been indifferent. It's kind of been that way with Twilight for me too. Like, I read the first couple of books in the Twilight series, never finished it. I did watch all the movies though, and I never felt a real strong connection to either of the couples. So I'm not really team anybody. And the same thing happened with The Summer I Turned Pretty. Maybe it's just me, but I was just never really on a certain side. I feel like I could have enjoyed the books more if I did have a side, but I was just kind of there, just reading. So overall, that's how the series felt to me. I was just reading a quick little series that I read in a couple of weeks. It was really good to have a light, easy series to read because I don't typically finish series that I start. At least it takes me a really long time, and I'm very intimidated by series. To have a little series with 3 books I could fly through felt good. I felt accomplished, and the books were summery, so that is why I read them in the summer. And those are my thoughts on the Summer I Turned Pretty series. The last book I read in June is kind of random. It is How to Win Friends and Influence People. I read this book in a book study with my college, so every week we met to discuss what we were reading. I was by far the youngest person in this group. A lot of the people reading this book were getting their doctorate degrees, and they just seemed so smart, and they went through a lot more in their lives so far, so it was very good to get their input on things. But it was really good to read this book as a younger person and get started now with these methods. I do need to reread this. They say in this book you're supposed to read it every month until you really got it down, and you're supposed to do everything it says in the book and have accountability partners, and I totally understand what they're saying with that, but I was just not super into this book, and I had a ton going on because I was doing 2 internships over the summer. But I would definitely recommend this book. I want to reread it and really apply what it says. Some of the things I totally remember, but other than that, I kind of forget what was in this book, which does happen with a lot of nonfiction books. The one thing that really stuck out to me with this book is the writing. Of course, How to Win Friends and Influence People is so influential and memorable of a book, so I was very excited to read it and see what Dale Carnegie had to say and how he wrote. And I really enjoy the way he wrote, especially his stories mixed in, and just the way he encouraged things was very different and a little bit in your face. I did enjoy the book. I gave it 4.5 stars. I feel like it's hard to not give a nonfiction book 4.5 or 5 stars, but overall, it's not a 5-star nonfiction read for me, but it was still really good, and there's lots of good advice in there. Next we have July. I only read 2 books in July. July was just not a great reading month for me. I wasn't super motivated, and I also just did not have time. My internships were super busy at this point. I definitely could have made more time to read. I just didn't really feel like it. The first book that I read in July was The Last Song, and this was my first Nicholas Sparks novel. This one was just sitting around our house. I decided to pick it up and see how he wrote. The Last Song is actually one of my top favorite books. I rated this 5 stars, and I actually rated the movie a 4.25, so that's pretty good because usually movies do not represent the book super well, but I feel like the movie did a pretty good job with it and didn't change too much. But we're here to talk about the books, not the movies, so I'm going to talk about what I thought about the book because I have a lot to say. In The Last Song, Ronnie is told she needs to spend a summer with her brother and her dad in Wrightsville Beach, North Carolina. And Ronnie was super opposed to this. She wanted to be back in New York City, and she did not understand why she had to spend the summer with her father, who she didn't really get along with at all. So in the beginning, we have a lot of turmoil with Ronnie, and she kind of goes off and does her own thing, kind of rebellious. She's a 17-year-old in the beginning, so she doesn't really have a ton of freedom yet, but she wants to have that freedom. So there's a lot of issues with her and her father. But over the book, we have so much character development, and I am obsessed with it. Ronnie grows up so much, and she develops this really strong relationship with not only her father, but also her younger brother, and of course, the love interest in this book. Ronnie meets Will, and through the development of their relationship, she begins to let her guard down, and then from that, she develops a really strong relationship with everyone else in her life. And it's just such a beautiful story. Like I said, beautiful character development. And there is a very sad aspect of the story, but it's so important to it. The ending was sad. I think I may have cried a little bit. And I don't really cry at books, but I was just so connected to these characters and the relationship. What happened needed to happen, and overall it was just a beautiful ending, but it was very sad. Something else I loved about this book was that it was clean. This was something I didn't really look into before reading, and I did kind of think there would be something because I'd heard of other Nicholas Sparks books, but this book, I don't know if it'd be considered YA, but of course Ronnie is 17. I was pleasantly surprised that there was nothing in this book, and it was just a really sweet but also deep story between Ronnie and the people close to her and her development as she goes through this summer. I also love this setting. I am from North Carolina, so I love the North Carolina stories. I highly, highly recommend The Last Song by Nicholas Sparks. The next book I read in July was actually Charlotte's Web. I really wanted a quick, easy book to get through because, of course, I was not having the best reading month. So I decided to reread this because I hadn't read it for years. I actually started Charlotte's Web last summer. I read it to some campers at a camp that I worked at, but I picked it up at a spot in the middle where the camp counselor had left off on, so I didn't really get the full story. But the parts that I did read, I really enjoyed, and I knew that I would enjoy it this summer. I did rate this book 5 stars. I feel like it's one of those books you can't not rate 5 stars. It's just so iconic and sweet. It makes you think of spiders in a different way, and it's such a good book. Next is August. I read 7 books this month. It was my best reading month, and this is because my internships were ending, so things were kind of slowing down, and I found some really good summer books that I flew through. I also started my reading my screen time challenge, so I read a few books in that one. The first book I read in August was Happy Place. I was super excited to read this book because people were giving it incredible reviews. People love Emily Henry's writing. I've read 3 of her books before and I've really enjoyed them. I think the only one I rated 5 stars was Book Lovers, which actually is not a lot of people's favorite book, but I just really love the sister aspect of the plot. But anyway, Happy Place was not my favorite. It's actually my least favorite of Emily Henry's books. I rated it 3.5 stars, so kind of an unpopular opinion, but nothing really stood out to me about this book. In this book, we follow a group of friends, which is a main difference in this book compared to other Emily Henry books, and they go on vacation in Maine. It's been a few years since they've gone, and the friendships are kind of falling apart. Harriet and Wynne are the main couple in this book. Everyone thinks they're still together, that they're still engaged, but they actually broke up months ago. So there is forced proximity and fake dating because they lie and they say to their friends that they're still all good, but they're actually not. So the secret comes out and we have a lot of friendship drama and connection towards the end. When I first heard about the premise of this book, I was excited because it is so different from anything I read before. I thought I would enjoy the whole friendship aspect of it, and it was pretty good, but it was just not my favorite. And I really don't know why I'm not a super big fan of this book. It just didn't really stick out to me as being something amazing. So that's why I gave it 3.5 stars, because it was still good. There are a lot of good topics in this book, especially around friendship. That was something good to read, but it was just not my favorite. That's pretty much all I have to say about that. The next book I read in August, however, is one of my favorite books ever, and that is Love and Gelato. I want to buy the physical copy of this so badly. I love to read books from my library first, and then if I love them, then I'll buy them. Sometimes I don't follow this rule because books are really cheap or I find them thrifted, but for the most part I like to kind of give it a trial run and then only buy books that I love. In this book, we follow Lena, and her mother's dying wish was to have her spend the summer in Italy with her father. Lena was super opposed to this. She wanted to go home pretty much as soon as she got there, but she knew her mother really wanted her to experience life in Italy as her mother had experienced. Soon, Lena meets Ren and his friends, and they have this great relationship start to develop, and she finds this diary from her mom, and from that diary she explores Italy in a completely new way. Ren helps take her around Italy and they experience all the things that her mother had experienced there. That was my favorite aspect of the book. I loved the setting in Italy. I loved hearing about the places. Italy is one of my top travel destinations I want to go to, so it was really good to experience that in this book. Love and Gelato was very unique of a book to me, especially a YA book, because it dealt with tougher topics but in a beautiful way. I seriously loved everything about this book. I read this book in 2 days and it was actually over a weekend, and when I got back to work on Monday, all I could think about was how I pretty much went to Italy over the weekend. It was so much fun to experience everything Lena was discovering, and I did not want to put this book down. I know there's a movie on Netflix and I was excited to watch it because I wanted to experience the story again. However, I heard so many bad things about this movie, how it was just not like the book, and I read this article of all the things that they changed, and I knew I did not want to waste my time with this movie. Please let me know if you've seen this movie and you think it's okay, but honestly, I just did not want to ruin the story for me because I love the book so much and I did not want to have this movie going through my head now that was just not the same. Next we have We Were Liars. This book was super popular before I got into reading again. I'm surprised I didn't really hear a ton about this book because I was 13 when it came out, so I was the target age for it, but I guess I was a little bit young because it does deal with some tougher topics and there is some language in it, so reading it now probably is for the best. I was really nervous to start this book because people seem to not really love it. They think it's okay or they think it's really weird and overhyped. And I don't love when books are overhyped. I have read a few of those overhyped books and I realized that they were not super great as people were making them out to be. So I was worried that this one was going to be that way. I did get this book for a really great deal last fall and I knew I wanted to read it over the summer because it deals with this group of people, mostly a family that lives on a private island off the coast of Massachusetts, which is really close to Martha's Vineyard. I didn't really know what was happening throughout this whole book, but in the end, you get the full picture and you realize, oh, that's what happened. Now I kind of want to reread it, knowing what I know now. I did enjoy this book, but it's not one of my favorites. I did rate it 3.75 stars, and a big part of that was the writing. I didn't particularly love it. It did feel a little bit cringy sometimes, but I understand that this book is for young adults, and for that, I'm not rating it too harshly. I do think that young adults would enjoy this book. This book was very different for me. I never read a book about a pretentious family before, and that was something that I did love reading about. It was really interesting to be in their world and learn the way that they think about things and interact with each other. Overall, I did like this book. It was a little bit confusing, but it came together in the end. The writing was not my favorite, but it was okay. It was different. The next book I read in August was The Summer of Broken Rules. I loved this book. In my reading journal, I have it written down that I rated this 4.75 stars, and I know on Goodreads I rounded it up to a 5. I'm not quite sure why I knocked off a quarter of a star, but that doesn't mean that I didn't absolutely love this book. This one is one of my favorites. It was fun to read The Summer of Broken Rules after We Were Liars because it was set in Martha's Vineyard, which was talked about in We Were Liars. A couple of the same businesses or areas were talked about, so that was pretty fun. But by far the most fun aspect of The Summer of Broken Rules was the game of Assassin. In this book, we follow Meredith, and she actually lost her sister, Claire, 18 months prior, and she's going to Martha's Vineyard for an annual family vacation. This time it's for a wedding. It's Meredith's first time back since she lost her sister, so there are a lot of memories that come back, and she deals with those. And during this annual summer vacation, they play a game of Assassin. This summer for the wedding, it was super crazy, and Meredith really wanted to try her hardest at this game to honor Claire's legacy because Claire was amazing at the game of Assassin. During this summer's game, Meredith forms an alliance with a groomsman whose name is Whit, and from this alliance we have an incredible relationship form. However, this is a very short relationship because they're only there for this vacation. At the end of this week-long vacation, Meredith and Whit have to figure out what they're going to do in their relationship, if they're going to pursue a long distance, or if they're just going to have a summer fling and let it end. Meredith is also trying to figure out her next steps in life, if she's going to go far away to college, or if she's going to stay at home, or if she's going to take a break because she's dealing with so much in her life right now. It's really hard for her to move on after her sister's passing, especially because she feels connection to Claire and she needs that support from her family close to home. We have a lot of growth in Meredith throughout this week, especially at the end, and I love that part of this book. I relate to Meredith in many ways as she is getting out of her comfort zone, moving on, and going off to college, and I really liked how this book ended. I totally supported their decision and the way that everything went. And for me, it was super relatable because of the relationship that I'm in. So I was super happy about the way that it ended. I love when things end well for couples like this, and I love this book for so many reasons. I completely recommend this book. I had such a blast reading it. It only took me 3 days too, and I was flying through it. I was just obsessed. So, highly recommend The Summer of Broken Rules. The next book I read was Single, Dating, Engaged, Married. This one is another nonfiction book, and this one is a book about relationships. Pretty obvious from the title. I had heard such good things about this book, and I was very curious to see if this book touched on anything new. I had read a few books about relationships, especially Christian nonfiction books, and I was a little bit worried that it would touch on the same things, and it definitely did, especially through the single and dating parts of the book. That was expected, but it was still really good to read. Lots of good information in here. I was a little bit worried that this book would feel outdated, as I think it came out in 2017, and relationships have changed so much, especially with the digital aspects of dating nowadays. However, this book was still really good. I feel like it could definitely be good for a few more years. There were a lot of statistics that were a little bit older, but a lot of them are still applicable to today. I did rate this book 4.75 stars. I feel like I knocked it off a quarter of a star just because it was a little bit older, but like I said, it's still a really good book to read, especially if you are considering engagement and marriage soon. This was the thing that I loved most about this book. I've read many dating books before, and it did touch on very familiar topics to me through the first half of this book. It actually took me 2 months to get through this book because of that. I was not super excited to read it, but then once I got to the engaged and married parts, I was super into it because that is something I had never really read about before and something I really wanted to learn about. This book touched on the right time to get engaged, what questions to ask before you get engaged, and in the engagement season before marriage, and it was super helpful. I highly recommend this book to anybody who has been in a dating relationship for a while and are considering engagement, and to people that are engaged. I think it is a super helpful book to read. Of course, if you are in the single and dating stages, it is really good to read as well. I think there are a lot of good books to read if you are in those seasons, especially Outdated by Jonathan Pokluda. Super good book, and I recommend it to my single friends. But I feel like this book was especially good for people that are dating. I definitely recommend this book. I recommended it to my boyfriend. I think that would be a super good book for him to read, and I'm really excited to hear his thoughts on the book as well. The next book that I read in August, I actually read for a reading challenge. I vlogged this, and it is Reading My Screen Time for a Week. So I won't talk about these books in detail. You can totally watch that video if you want to hear my thoughts and hear my real-time reactions to those books. The first book I read was Malibu Rising. I did rate this 4.75 stars. We do have a lot of 4.75 stars this summer, which are really good. I did find a couple of 5-star books, so really fun. That was a really good read. It is literary fiction, and it was so different from anything I'd read before, so definitely recommend that one. The next book I read was The Bodyguard. This one I rated 4.5 stars. This was such a fun, clean summer romance. I highly recommend that book, especially if you like fake dating. That was all the books that I read in August, and now we have the first 2 books I read in September. These books I also read for that reading challenge, and the first one was If He Had Been With Me. This one I rated 4 stars. It was a sad romance, and it was also a coming of age story. I really enjoyed it. Very different. It was a little bit longer and did feel a little bit slow. Very interesting story. I do love coming of age stories, so that was something I absolutely loved about this book. It was sad, especially at the end when everything happened all at once. I did not cry just because I felt like I was never able to really build up the emotions because it did happen so abruptly, but I can definitely understand why people would sob at the ending. The last book in my summer reading wrap-up is Practice Makes Perfect. This one, unfortunately, I gave 3 stars. It wasn't a bad book, I just didn't love it as much as When in Rome by her. It deals with the same setting, and you see familiar characters, and I do like the story. I can definitely understand why people would love this story, but it was just not really what I was expecting, especially from Sarah Adams, as I had read When in Rome before. I thought it would be very similar writing and more of a clean book, but it did deal with some physical parts of the relationship, and that was kind of what the book focused on, which was not something I loved, but overall it was pretty closed door from what I remember, as Sarah Adams tends to write. I did love Annie as a character in this book. It was fun to have someone with social anxiety represented. I love the setting of Rome, Kentucky. It's a small town romance, which is so much fun. And I also loved seeing the characters from When in Rome pop up in this book as well. Those were all the books that I read this summer. It was a super good reading summer, as I am getting to know what kind of books that I love, and I'm reading more of those. So I'm enjoying more and more of the books that I'm reading, and it's really fun because this is right around the time last year that I was getting really into reading again. So it has officially been a year of reading, and I love that, especially because fall is coming up and I absolutely love reading in the fall. I am so excited to read some thrillers and mysteries, and I will be filming a fall TBR, so stay tuned for that so you can see what I'm planning on reading this fall. Thank you so much for watching my thoughts about these books. Let me know if you have read any of these books or if you sound interested in any of them. I would love to hear your thoughts. Thank you again so much for watching.